So before we get to cutting and printing our first color, I just want to go through the tools. One of the tools that I don't have here is one that I actually use the X-Acto knife for instead. It's a sort of kind of triangular shaped form, and it's meant to carve into the block to create a kind of edge. So I find the X-Acto knife is a little sharper, and I can change the blade on it so it works better for me. So if I was going to do that, and for instance when you're getting ready to cut that little gully, there's going to be a little gully between your registration pins and the start of your image. I use the X-Acto knife to create a barrier. So I'm going through and just kind of cutting pretty heavy with the X-Acto knife, and you can go over it a few times. We're working with plywood, so the layers of plywood go in different directions. So this layer is going this way. The second layer will go this way. So sometimes it's a little harder to get through the second layer because it's going in the different direction of the wood grain. So then once I've made my lines that are going to be where I want to just kind of carve all this away without any kind of artistic aspect to it, I'm just going to use this chisel. It's got a flat top. It's not rounded at all. It's just straight across. And I'm just going to use it to kind of work under the wood and just chisel it out. And you can see that what's happening is the X-Acto knife lines are creating a really sharp, even edge, so that I can have this real nice clean area to create my border. This area was where I didn't do the X-Acto knife, but if you do it carefully and just stay within your lines, it should break off right where your X-Acto knife lines are. And so this is useful if you really want to cut away a big area and have it be very white. Okay, so that's using this chisel tool. The other tools you have, this was a V-gouge. It's got a very sharp bottom and it's got a wide side. It's meant for cutting lines. So you can see that it'll go pretty deep, and it'll also go very shallow. So you could do really super thin lines, or you could do deeper lines. Remember, when you're working with the tools, the tools are meant to go in the palm of your hand, and then you just wrap your index finger around the top of the tool. And when you're cutting, you just want to barely touch the surface of the wood. If you hold it like a pencil and carve like this, you're going to be going much too deep, and so you'll end up just kind of making really big gouges, and it won't really look like a mark. It won't look like a linear mark. But this is nice because you can actually kind of push it and get thin and thick lines. These tools are very sharp, and so they do really cut beautifully. Generally, when you're just doing linear information like this, if I was going to make some patterns, for instance, you don't have to go very deep. You can just go through the top layer of the plywood, and so it makes it quite easy to cut. This area that I wanted to have super clean, I went through a few layers of the plywood just to make sure it was a little bit lower. Okay. The other two tools that you have are ones that I use a lot. They're called U-gouges, and so they're a little rounder on the bottom, and the small one is very nice for doing little small details, and the big one you can just make wider marks with. So I'll show you the big one. You can cut pretty big areas away. If you didn't want it to be quite as clean as this, but you wanted to have a little bit of the chatter of the marks in between, this is a nice one to use because you'll have a little raised area that will show you that'll kind of give you that little sense of the lines kind of just overlapping. And you can't see it here, but I'll do a rubbing in just a minute to show you how that works. And then the smaller tool is going to make marks that are smaller, but they're more of a rounded mark, so they're a little bit bigger than the V gouge, and will give you a little bit more body in the mark. Okay, so this X-Acto knife trick works really well too if you were wanting to, let's say you had an area that you wanted to go in a direction, but you wanted it to break off at the edge of like your hairline. And so if you cut an X-Acto knife line if you draw with the X-Acto knife along your hairline, for instance, and then you used the wide tool to cut up to it, it'll break off at your hairline. I usually make these marks pretty short going up to the X-Acto knife, just so I don't create a lot of problems with it slipping. And sometimes I put my other finger on it like this. And then if you don't quite go to the edge, if it doesn't quite break off, you can just take the X-Acto knife and cut it again, and it'll break off where you want it to. And then if I wanted to do the areas going the other way, I would just, if I wanted to make it go further, I would just do it, make the marks going this way when it's not so crucial that I would slip into an area that I don't want to go in this direction. Okay, so I'll just turn it around and show you how I finish that off. And again, you want to just really kind of nudge up to that edge. Don't go too hard, and just if it doesn't break off, just use the X-Acto knife line to get it to move away. Okay, so these are the different kinds of marks that the tools will make, and again, you can do little short marks, you can do longer marks, you can do parallel lines, and so forth. One thing you can do before you're printing, just to make sure that you're getting exactly what you want, is you can do a little rubbing of the marking, and just take a piece of paper and lay it over the top of your block, and using the side of the pencil, go over it with the side of the pencil, so that you can kind of see. This pencil's not too sharp, but you'll get the idea that you can sort of get a little bit of an idea of how the marks are going to print. Okay, so that's the basics on the tools, and now you're going to go ahead and start to cut your white areas away and move on to printing your first color. This is my block in the condition it was in before I printed my second color, and I'll walk you through some of the things that I did in cutting it. In this area, I used the X-Acto knife along the hairline so that I could cut around the edge of the face and up to the forehead. In the forehead area, I used the large U-gouge to cut a lot of the area away, and then I used a smaller U-gouge to create a transition from the cutaway area to the area that's not cut away. To make the trough or channel, I used the X-Acto knife to cut on either side of it, and then I used the chisel to carve away a big chunk of it. If you don't want to make a channel, you can just tear down your print later and make it go to the edge of the paper. And then in the decorative pattern on the strap of the shirt, I used the V-gouge to make some little small marks that look like stitching. Remember, you can always use the back of your plate to do any experimenting and try out some things before you cut onto the good side. You can even roll it with ink to see what it would look like.